So in the previous videos, we've looked at entry strategies. Now we're going to shift the focus and go on the other side, from the entrant to those companies that are already active in the market that we're looking at. We call these firms incumbents. And as you can imagine, they're not terribly happy about some other company entering the market. And so they're trying to figure out what they might do to keep this potential entrant out of the market. And this set of strategies is what we're going to discuss in the next couple of videos, and we'll call those entry deterrents. But before we even think about specific strategies, let me briefly recap the motivation for entry deterrents. When does it make sense? Why does it make sense? And how does it look like? Think of this situation here. You've got a certain level of profits. You're enjoying monopoly profits at this at the certain level. So up here. And you know that at some point there might be a potential entrant. And let's say that after period 1, there's a potential entrant who might enter. Could be because technology becomes further developed, could be because a patent runs out, any of these things that makes entry possible after period 1. Now, you can do one of two things as the incumbent, as the current firm in the market. You can either try to block entry by investing into something that's going to make it more difficult or less attractive for the entrant to come in. Now, doing something like that will probably mean that your profits are going to go down. So the difference between initial monopoly profits and blocking entry is kind of a cost you have from entry deterrence. You could also accommodate entry. And accommodating entry has two kind of trade-offs, if you wish. The one thing is that at the moment, or for as long as you're still a monopolist, you're going to make higher profits than if you blocked entry, right? Easy to think about it, because after all, blocking entry means you're doing something that's costly to you just to keep a potential entrant out of the market. So you're going to make higher profits if you did nothing. On the other hand, if you accommodate entry, this is going to mean that over a longer period of time, i.e. whenever the entrant has come into the market, you're going to have lower profits. Okay, so these lower profits are going to mean that if you blocked entry, your profits would be higher. If you accommodate entry, your profits would be lower. And so in this case, we have to compare the cost of deterring entry, that's simply the difference between initial monopoly profits and the profits from blocking entry, to the cost of losing market share, which is the difference between monopoly profits initially and duopoly profits, which is what happens if you accommodate entry. Okay, so we've got these two that we have to compare, and what we do is we try to compare the net present value of blocking to the net present value of accommodating, and whichever of those two is larger is going to determine whether you want to deter entry or if you want to accommodate entry. So what forms can deterring entry take? First of all, it could simply raise entry barriers. Right? This could mean that you take control of some essential resources. You could ensure exclusive access to a particular resource. Let's say you need a certain type of raw material to be active in a market. Diamonds, let's say. So if you secure access to all the diamonds that are being mined, then it's going to be difficult for anyone else to enter the market for jewelry. If you secure more resources than is necessary, let's say for one particular input for satisfying demand, it's also going to make it more difficult for someone else to enter, right? So if you secure one essential input for the product that you're currently producing, anyone else will probably either have to come up with a substitute, or he would have to pay huge prices to get firms to produce that kind of input. Okay, so here again, controlling essential resources might be an entry deterring strategy. Taking advantage of economies of scale and scope, or even learning economies, might be another strategy that raises the entry barriers. Simply achieving lower cost through larger scales. In other words, if you simply produce more, you can produce it at a lower marginal cost or at a lower average cost, and that's going to make it again less profitable for someone to come in, because he knows that the market price is lower than he would hope. You might leverage experience advantages. So if you have produced a large number of units, a large output cumulatively, then it's likely that the next unit that you want to produce is much, much cheaper for you than it is for someone who just entered the market, right? Experience matters. So you get better at doing things, you get cheaper at doing things. In a similar way, increasing the technological lead. So if you stay close to the technological frontier, simply anyone who wants to compete with you will have to get up to a certain level of technological expertise. And the closer you are to the frontier, the better your technology is, the more difficult it's going to be for anyone else to come in. Another entry barrier that may play a big role are marketing advantages, having a marketing advantage. So, for example, if you simply build up a loyal group of consumers that are loyal to your brand and none other. So think of one example here, Kleenex, right? So Kleenex is a massively successful brand. It happened to be the first entrant into the market. And I don't know a great deal about the market for paper towels, but I would imagine it's fairly simple, or it's possible at least, to produce a similar quality paper towel as Kleenex. Now, as it happened, most people will simply look at Kleenex when they're thinking of getting paper towels, and that eventually has led to the fact that Kleenex is dominant. Kleenex is a market share that's much bigger than their second biggest rival. Okay. Raising switching costs for consumers also constitutes an entry barrier. So if you raise switching costs, for example, by having people buy lots of complementary products, we've had that in a previous lecture. If you raise switching costs by signing people up on a long-term contract, that's going to mean that anyone who enters is going to have a very difficult time getting a critical mass of consumers. And consequently, it's going to be difficult for you, or it's going to be difficult for them to enter successfully. Now, another strategy that firms often use is the strategy of commitment. What is commitment, and in what way is it interesting? It's committing to an aggressive behavior after entry happens, and which may seem somewhat strange, but the intuition, the game theoretic intuition behind that is that you're trying to eliminate those moves which would lead to equilibria that are successful or profitable for the entrant. And of course, by that token, they're less profitable and less attractive for you. Let's have a look actually at this example, or let's have a look at a commitment strategy using an old example, or a previous example that we've used in week 1 actually. So this is the case of Deutsche BA choosing whether to enter a market or not to enter. Lufthansa can choose to start a price war or not to start a price war if Deutsche BA had entered. So the payoffs are as follows. And now let's have a quick in-video quiz. And for you to try and solve this game, you know this game already, let's see if you can still solve it. And I'll see you back in 1 second. Okay, so hope you all attempted the in-video quiz. Let's now solve the game. How do we do it? We do it by backward induction. Now, by backward induction, we have to look at Lufthansa's move at this point when Deutsche BA has entered the market. If Deutsche BA has entered, then Lufthansa can choose to not start a price war, in which case they would make profits of 400, or start a price war and they would make profits of 0. So the optimal strategy for them is not to start a price war. Now, Deutsche BA can anticipate that. So when they are at this point, when they start the game choosing not to enter or to enter, if they don't enter, they make profits of 0. If they do enter, they anticipate that Lufthansa would not start a price war, and they would anticipate that they get profits of 400. So of course for Deutsche BA, it's optimal to enter the market. For Lufthansa, it's optimal not to start a price war. So can Lufthansa do something about this? So Lufthansa seemingly faces a situation where Deutsche BA can just enter and steal part of the market. They're on an even keel at this point. Now, Lufthansa can sign a contract. They can sign a commitment saying that we're going to pay a penalty of 500 to the Star Alliance if there is no price war, i.e., if Deutsche BA enters and Lufthansa, we as Lufthansa, do not retaliate by starting a price war, we're going to commit to pay a penalty of 500. And that, just from the face of it, sounds like a completely strange strategy. Why would Lufthansa agree to throwing away money to their partners if they don't have to? Well, let's see how this changes the game. It's going to change the game by changing the payoffs from 400 to minus 100 in the case where Deutsche BA enters and Lufthansa does not start a price war. And how is that going to change the game if we again solve it by backward induction? So Lufthansa has the choice of not starting a price war and getting minus 100 and starting a price war and getting 0. So in contrast to the game that we looked at before, now it's optimal for Lufthansa to actually run the price war. It's better now for them to be aggressive at this point. Now Deutsche BA is going to look at this and say, well, if we enter, Lufthansa is going to start a price war and we're going to make profits of minus 500. If we don't enter, nothing's going to happen and we're going to make profits of 0. So now the best strategy by Deutsche BA is not to enter the market, and there's nothing left to do for Lufthansa. So this is the outcome of the game. And it's kind of interesting if you think of a commitment strategy, which basically only changes payoffs to the worse for Lufthansa, and still the outcome of the game can be more profitable for Lufthansa than the initial game without commitment. So commitment is only one of several entry deterrence strategies. Let's now discuss more of them in the following videos. I'll see you in a second.